Hey guys, tonight we're slipping back into the damp, creaking corridors of the medieval world, a place of flickering torchlight, rattling armor, and the constant background smell of horse sweat mixed with something far less pleasant. You're standing there in the cold morning air, the mist clinging to your cloak like a stubborn guest who refuses to leave. And in just a moment, you're going to find out exactly why being a knight was in tea, all about galloping into glory and rescuing maidens from towers. Your fingers are stiff, your boots still wet from yesterday's march, and in about an hour, you'll be longing for a time machine so you can get back to your soft pillow and Wi-Fi signal. You probably won't survive this, honestly. Most people didn't, at least not with all their limbs still attached. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love it if you drop your location and local time down in the comments, so I know where and when in the world you're listening. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice as the sun climbs, weak and pale over the stone walls, is the sheer weight of the role you've chosen or maybe been forced into. You're a knight, sworn to some lord who probably can't remember your name, but will absolutely remember if you fail him. The armor waiting for you in the corner is like an impatient relative. It demands attention before you've even had the luxury of food. You drag the chainmail over your head, the cold metal biting at your skin, and already your shoulders complain. This is just the underlayer, full plate, if you're lucky enough to own one, comes later. And that will make you feel like you're walking around inside a personal oven. Historians still argue whether knights truly wore their armor for long stretches during peacetime, or if it was reserved for battle and ceremony. But here in your world, you don't have the luxury of academic debates. You put it on when you're told, and you take it off when you're allowed. The morning meal is no feast from a tapestry. It's a chunk of coarse bread, maybe some cheese that's seen better days, and watered ale that's more about hydration than pleasure. You eat quickly because the drill master's voice is already booming across the courtyard. You join the others, men who look like they were born with swords in their hands. But you know they're just as sore and tired as you. The training starts with footwork hours of stepping, pivoting, lunging, until the motions blur into instinct. Then comes the sparring. Your opponent today is heavier, faster, or simply more annoyed at life than you are, and every strike he makes is a test of your reflexes. You feel each blow rattle through your arms. Each parry send a jolt up into your shoulders. A quirky little fact you'd never guess. Some knights, trained by fighting in deliberately uncomfortable clothing-tight leather jerkins, weighted boots to make battle gear feel lighter. You can't decide whether that's genius or just medieval masochism. After sparring, you're sent to the stables. Because being a knight is as much about caring for your horse as it is about swinging a sword. Your destrier eyes you with mild irritation, as though it knows you'll be expecting it to charge into chaos later. You curry its coat, clean its hooves, check the straps on its tack. Riding drills follow, and the instructors shout commands while you weave between posts. Draw weapons at a gallop, and try not to fall flat on your face in the dirt. The wind bites at your cheeks, but sweat clings under your layers, a sticky reminder that comfort is a rare luxury. Then, without pause, you're back to weapon drills. Sword, lance, makesage with its own weight, balance, and demands. You swing until your grip feels like it might give out, and even then, you keep going. Lunch is barely a pause. You wolf down something warm, maybe a stew with more broth than meat, and then you're back on your feet. The afternoon is for formation practice. Shields lock, lances lower, and you march in unison, the ground vibrating with the synchronized thud of boots. It's monotonous, but you understand why it matters. On the battlefield, hesitation is death. You move as one, or you fall apart. Still, there's a grim awareness that no matter how perfect your training, war has a way of breaking even the best. By the time the sun sinks and the shadows stretch long, you're exhausted. But your day isn't over. Armor needs cleaning. Weapons need oiling. The stables need mucking out. You work until your hands are raw, your back stiff, your legs trembling. A younger version of you might have believed knighthood was a life of feasts and glory. But the truth is here, in the grind, in the aching muscles, and the endless chores. You collapse onto your straw mattress with the smell of metal and horse lingering in your nose. And sleep comes fast, but it's not peaceful. You dream of endless drills, of faceless opponents, of the weight of armor pressing down until you can't breathe. And in the faint light of dawn, before your eyes are even open, you know it will start all over again. You wake before the sun because the sound of a horn cuts through your dreams like a blade, pulling you up from whatever shallow sleep you managed to scrape together on your lumpy straw mattress. And before you can even stretch your aching limbs, you're already thinking about the day's obligations and wondering how many bruises you'll collect before nightfall. The air is damp again, carrying the smell of the courtyard mud churned by hooves, the faint acrid tang of old manure, and the sharper bite of blacksmith smoke drifting from the forge where the apprentices have been working since before dawn. You swing your legs over the side of the bed and instantly regret it because your calves and thighs are stiff from yesterday's endless drills, and your shoulders feel like they've been used as a blacksmith's anvil. You pull on your tunic and hose, the wool scratchy against your skin, then layer the padded gambeson over it, feeling the bulk of it restrict your arms. That gambeson is your silent companionate, LLB, the one barrier between your skin and the chainmail that waits glinting dully in the dim light. You hoist the mail shirt over your head, and as the metal rings settle onto your shoulders with a familiar clink, the weight is a reminder that every move today will cost you energy you have to spare. Historians still argue whether chainmail really weighed as much as some legends claim, with figures ranging from 40 to 60 pounds depending on style and coverage. But you, need a debate to tell. You, it feels like carrying a stubborn child on your back all day. Breakfast is the same rough bread and cheese as yesterday, but you eat it without complaint, because there's no time for leisure. Outside, the sky is a dull gray, promising either rain or more mud, and the drill master is already shouting for everyone to assemble. Today's training starts with mounted combat exercises, which means you and your destrier have to work as one, responding instantly to each other's movements. You lead him out of the stable, patting his neck, feeling the warmth of his body through your gloves. He snorts, as if he knows you were both about to spend the morning charging at wooden quintons and stuffed dummies. You mount up, shifting your weight to balance the armor and the long lance you grip in your right hand. The first gallop jolts you into full alertness, wind cutting at your cheeks, the pounding of hooves echoing in your bones. You lower the lance, aim for the center of the target, and feel the satisfying crack as the point strikes home. But the drill master isn't satisfied. He barks for more speed, cleaner strikes, tighter turns. You loop back, spurring the destrier forward, your thighs already burning from holding the saddle so tightly. A quirky fact about these drills: some lords demanded that their knights train on uneven ground to mimic the chaos of a real battlefield. So every dip and rock is a test of your control. By mid-morning, your arms are trembling from holding the lance steady, your knees aching from bracing against each impact. The next round of practice switches to swords, and you trade the lance for the heavier, shorter blade meant for close combat. This is where precision matters: cut, parry, thrust, all while your horse shifts and moves beneath you. You practice until sweat is dripping down your back, soaking the padded gambeson, making the metal above it cling uncomfortably. When the horn sounds for midday, you slide off your horse with stiff legs, leading him back to the stable for water and a rub-down. Lunch is stew again, thin but warm, eaten quickly in the mess hall under the watchful eye of a steward who measures portions like gold dust. There's talk among the other knights about a patrol in the coming days, a chance to ride beyond the walls and test your training against the unpredictability of the real world. Some are eager, others are wary, and you keep your thoughts to yourself, focusing instead on the task ahead. The afternoon shifts to formation work on footshield walls, advancing in tight ranks, coordinating strikes as a single unit. The ground is churned into a slick mess beneath your boots, and more than once you slip, feeling the sharp jolt of the fall in your spine. But you recover quickly, because hesitation here draws the drill master's wrath and the jeers of your comrades. Historians still argue whether medieval shield walls were primarily defensive, or could be effectively used to press forward in an assault. But right now, the only thing you care about is keeping your shield up and your footing steady. The drills stretch until the sun is low, and your arms feel like lead. As you break formation, you think the day might finally be winding down, but you're wrong. There's the evening watch rotation, which means you'll spend hours on the ramparts, scanning the horizon for threats that probably aren't there, but could be raiders, enemy scouts, or just desperate peasants trying to sneak into the safety of the keep. The wind is sharper up here, cutting through the layers of wool and metal, and the silence is broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the creak of the wooden beams under your boots. You pace, you peer into the darkness, and your mind wanders to the question of whether this life is really what you imagined. You remember the stories told by traveling bards, all gallantry and honor, none of the blisters, bruises, or boredom. The hours crawl by until at last you're relieved, and you descend the winding stairs to the warmth of the barracks. Your gear must still be cleaned, every link of chainmail checked for damage, every weapon wiped free of moisture to keep rust at bay. It's tedious work, and your fingers are stiff, but you know skipping it means trouble later. By the time you strip off the armor, your body is an aching map of the day's trials. You sink back onto the straw mattress, closing your eyes, and even in the darkness, you see the shapes of targets, the glint of blades, the restless flick of your horse's ears. Sleep takes you quickly, but it carries with it the knowledge that tomorrow will be no different to another dawn. Another horn, another march into exhaustion. You wake to the cold bite of damp air pressing against your face. Because sometime during the night the wind shifted, sneaking in through the ill-fitted shutters and bringing with it the smell of wet earth and smoke from the kitchen fires being stoked for the day ahead. And before you've even opened your eyes fully, the faint clatter of armor tells you others are already moving about, readying themselves for another round of drills and duties that will leave you just as sore and weary as yesterday. You roll over slowly, feeling the weight of your body like a stone in a sack, every joint complaining as you force yourself upright, your mind already ticking through the mental list. Polish the sword, oil the armor, tend to the horse report for training. Keep your head down when the drill master is in a mood. Your feet touch the uneven wooden boards of the floor, cold, enough to make you suck in a sharp breath, and you pull on your hose and tunic, layering the gambeson over it, the thick padding already smelling faintly of old sweat despite yesterday's airing. That smell will never quite leave. It's the scent of work and effort ingrained in the fabric as much as in you. You eat quickly more bread, more cheese, a sliver of cured meat if you're lucky, and wash it down with ale, thin enough to be safer than the water, but barely enough to lift the fog from your head. Outside, the yard is already alive with motion. Squires running errands, stable boys hauling buckets, the clang of hammer on metal from the forge. The day's first task is weapons maintenance, and you take your place on a bench, laying out your gear in careful order. Historians still argue whether knights were personally responsible for this upkeep or relied entirely on squires. But here, you know better than to hand off a blade without making sure it has been properly cared, for neglect will earn you more than just a dull edge. It'll earn you a public dressing down. You run the oiled cloth along the sword's length, checking for nicks or flaws, the rhythmic motion strangely calming despite the chill seeping into your fingers. Once the weapons are in order, you move on to the morning's training. Archery today, which I is strictly a knight's specialty, but is drilled nonetheless, because a fight docenti always give you the weapon you prefer. You take up the longbow, feeling the taut strength of the string under your fingers, the smooth curve of the yew, and as you notch the arrow, you draw it back slowly, the muscles in your back and shoulders straining, your breath steadying. The target stands 50 paces away, a painted circle nailed to a wooden frame, and you loose the arrow, watching it thud into the outer ring. Not perfect. You draw again, adjusting your stance, the repetition working its way into your muscles, until the ache sets in and the string has raised a faint welt along the inside of your forearm. Between rounds, there's the smell of straw and manure drifting in from the stables, and you find your thoughts drifting to your destrier, wondering if he's as restless as you feel. A quirky detail. Some knights swore by talking to their horses as if they were comrades, claiming it built trust, while others scoffed at the idea, insisting that discipline alone forged the bond. By mid-morning, your fingers are stiff from the bow, and the drill shifts to spear work, the long shaft heavier and more awkward to maneuver, but deadly in practiced hands. You thrust at the straw dummy, feeling the point bite and the shaft shudder as it meets resistance, pulling back and striking again in a rhythm that leaves your arms humming with the effort. Sweat trickles down your temples despite the cool air, stinging your eyes, and you swipe it away with the back of your hand, never pausing for long. When the horn calls for midday, you're grateful, leading your destrier out for his own exercises before you eat. The horse snorts at you, as if unimpressed, his breath puffing white in the air, and you run a hand along his neck, feeling the power coiled in his muscles. You ride out into the practice field, guiding him through tight turns, sudden stops, quick bursts of speed that leave you clinging to the saddle and grinning despite yourself. Lunch is thicker stew today, with a few scraps of carrot and onion floating in it, and you savor every bite before heading back to the yard for afternoon duties. These involve patrol drills pairs of you riding out along the outer walls, keeping an eye on the road and the fields beyond. You notice how quiet it is, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears, broken only by the distant bleat of sheep and the occasional caw of a crow. You pass peasants at work, bent over in the fields, and they glance up briefly before returning to their labor. Historians still debate whether such patrols were genuinely effective deterrents or more symbolic shows of presence. But either way, you ride on, scanning the horizon, feeling the wind tug at your cloak. By the time you return, the sun is dipping low, and you're ushered straight into evening melee practice, where the point is not to win, but to endure 24 of you in a loose ring, pairing off, clashing swords and shields until you're breathless and sore, then rotating to the next opponent. The clang of metal on metal fills the air, punctuated by the occasional grunt or hiss of pain, and the ground becomes treacherous with churned mud. A blow catches you on the shoulder, sending a jolt down your arm, and you retaliate with a shove of your shield that knocks your partner back a step. The drill master calls for more aggression, his voice cutting through the din, and you push yourself harder, sweat running down your spine under the armor. When it's finally over, you're dismissed to the barracks, where the evening routine begins again. Remove the armor, clean every piece, tend to the weapons, check the straps and buckles for wear. The smell of oil and leather fills the cramped space, mingling with the low murmur of voices as the others do the same. You eat your supper, a hunk of bread, a wedge of cheese, and stretch out on your bed, the straw shifting under you, the aches in your muscles settling in like unwelcome guests. Outside, the night deepens, the air cooling, and you let your eyes close, knowing that sleep will come quickly, and that when it does, it will carry you forward to another dawn, another horn, another day lived under the weight of steel, and the constant demand to be ready for whatever might come. You wake before the horn, this time the dim gray light creeping in through the cracks in the shutters, and the low, muffled sounds of movement beyond the door, telling you that the barracks is already stirring to life, and your body protests. The thought of leaving the bed, every muscle stiff, the dull throb in your shoulder from yesterday. Esmele, a reminder that the bruises take longer to fade than the day itself. The smell of damp wool and smoke lingers in the air, clinging to the blankets, and you pull yourself up slowly, rubbing your eyes, feeling the grit of poor sleep still clinging to you. You dress in the chill, pulling on your hose, your tunic, then your gambeson, the padded armor, heavy and cumbersome, even before the plate is strapped over it. And as you lace the ties, you hear the low mutter of a squire arguing with another over who's fetching water. The morning meal is more of the same bread that's gone slightly hard, a smear of soft cheese, a gulp of weak ale that leaves a faint tang in your mouth, and you eat quickly, not because you're eager, but because you know lingering will only draw the wrong kind of attention. Outside, the yard is slick with mud from last night's rain, your boots sinking into it as you make your way to the stables, where your destrier stamps impatiently, tossing his head as you approach. You run a brush along his flank, checking his hooves, murmuring a low greeting that makes his ears flick toward you. And you remember the quirky superstition you heard last week from an older knight, that whispering a secret into your horse's ear before battle will keep you alive, though whether it's the whisper or the horse's steady temperament that matters is anyone's guess. Today's duties start with mounted combat drills, and you haul yourself into the saddle, the leather creaking under your weight as you take up the reins. The field is still damp, the grass slick, but the drill master isn't interested in excuses. You spur forward at his command, guiding your horse. Into tight maneuvers, your sword drawn as you practice striking at padded targets from a gallop. The wind stings your face, the impact of each blow reverberating through your arm, and you focus on keeping your balance, knowing one slip could send you sprawling into the muck. By mid-morning, you're sweating under the armor, the gambeson clinging to your back, and the drills shift to lance work. The long weapon awkward to control, at first your arm aching from the weight as you aim for the rings suspended from posts. The lance strikes true more often than not, but each miss earns you a sharp bark from the drill master, who rides alongside, his expression unreadable beneath his helm. Historians still argue whether these tournaments and exercises truly prepared knights for the chaos of battle, or if they were as much about spectacle as skill. But here, with the sun beginning to break through the clouds and the breath of your horse puffing in the cool air, it feels more like survival training than showmanship. After the mounted drills, you're sent to spar on foot, sword, and shield once more in hand, the ground uneven beneath you, sucking at your boots as you shift and strike. The clang of steel rings out across the yard, and you find yourself locked in a rhythm with your opponent. The back and forth almost hypnotic until he feints left and catches you with a sharp rap to the ribs, the blow glancing off the plate, but still enough to make you grunt. You retaliate, pushing him back, the effort leaving you breathing hard, your shoulders burning. When the horn calls for the midday break, you're more than ready, and you retreat to the shade with a wooden bowl of pottage, thicker than usual, thanks to someone adding a handful of barley to the pot. You eat slowly, savoring the warmth that spreads through your chest, before heading back for the afternoon's assignment, a patrol beyond the walls. The road stretches ahead, rutted from carts and damp from the rain, and you ride in silence beside another knight, both of you scanning the hedgerows and fields. The quiet is deceptive. You know well enough that bandits favor days like this, when the ground is soft enough to muffle footsteps and the gray sky keeps travelers uneasy. You pass a group of peasants hauling sacks of grain, their faces hidden beneath rough hoods, and they step aside without a word, eyes down. A few miles out, you find the remains of a small fire near the tree line, still faintly warm, and you exchange a glance with your companion, whoever was here left recently. There's no sign of trouble now, but the knowledge sits in the back of your mind like a stone in your boot. By the time you return to the keep, the light is already fading, and you're sent to the lists for another round of drills. This time, focusing on dismounted engagements against multiple opponents. The drill master pits 3 against 1, and you're given the center position, forced to pivot quickly to keep each foe in your sight. The strikes come fast, and you block instinctively, the impact jarring your wrists. Your breathing growing ragged as the mud splashes up your legs. You feel the sting of a blow against your thigh, the plate absorbing most of it, but not enough to stop the ache that will linger. The drill master calls a halt, and you stand, chest heaving, sweat running down into your collar, your hands trembling from the strain. Evening falls quickly after, the air cooling, the smell of roasting meat drifting faintly from the kitchens, and you make your way back to the barracks, stripping the armor piece by piece, each buckle and strap familiar under your fingers. You clean the gear methodically, rubbing oil into the leather, checking the edges of the blades. The routine as ingrained as breathing by now. Supper is simple: more bread, more cheese, a slice of dried apple that feels almost like a luxury, and then you stretch out on your straw mattress, the rough blanket pulled up to your chin. Outside, the night hums with the distant hoot of an owl, the occasional bark of a dog, and the soft creak of the wooden beams settling, and you let your eyes drift shut. The thought of tomorrow already pressing in like the weight of the armor you put on again with the dawn. You wake to the sound of rain, this time steady and soft at first, then harder. A constant drumming against the wooden roof above that seeps into your thoughts before you even open your eyes. The air in the barracks is damp, heavier than usual. The straw in your mattress faintly musty, and you know before your feet hit the floor that the yard will be a mire before the morning out. Pulling on cold hose and a tunic that still feels clammy from yesterday's sweat is an unpleasant start, but you push through, lacing up your gambeson, feeling its bulk settle on your shoulders like a familiar burden. Outside, the stable smells sharper in the wet air, a mixture of hay, leather, and the warm, earthy scent of horses, and you run a cloth along your destrier's flank, brushing away droplets before cinching the saddle straps tighter than usual to keep them from slipping in the wet. The drill master doesn't care for the weather, and the day's orders are the same as if the sun were shining. Mounted formation drills, shield practice, and patrol duty by afternoon. The field is a churned expanse of mud, hooves sinking deep with every step, and your destrier's ears flick back as the rain beads along his mane. You adjust your grip on the reins, feeling the water seep into your gloves, and you guide him into the practiced lines of your fellow riders, shields up, lances lowered at the command. The impact with the practiced targets is less satisfying today, the mud swallowing the force, and you shift your weight, mindful of the risk of a slip. Somewhere behind you, a younger knight curses as his mount stumbles, and the drill master's bark cuts through the rain like a whip. Historians still argue whether knights in full plate ever truly fought in such conditions, or whether campaigns often stalled until the ground dried. But the rain eschew on your neck makes you certain that no commander with sense would willingly choose it yet. Here you are. After the mounted work, the formation shifts to foot drills, and you slog through the mud with your shield raised, your sword heavy in your hand, practicing the advance and retreat in tight lines. Your boots grow heavier with each step, the muck clinging to them until it feels as though you're dragging half the field along. The shield arm burns from holding the weight steady, and the leather strap bites into your forearm, softened by the wet but no less irritating. By midday, you're soaked through, your gambeson holding the water like a sponge, and you're grateful for the short break beneath the shelter of the stable's overhang. You chew on a strip of salted meat that tastes strong and briny, chasing it with a mouthful of watered ale, and you overhear one of the squires telling a story about a knight who swore the only way to keep armor from rusting in the rain was to rub it down with goose fat before battle, a claim that earns a snort from his companion. The afternoon patrol is worse than the morning drills, the rain still falling, the road a slippery mess that slows your pace. The hedgerows drip steadily, and you notice the way the water darkens the bark of the trees, the leaves overhead shaking with each gust of wind. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the faint, eerie call of a hunting horn knot from your own keep, and not close enough to be an immediate threat, but enough to set your teeth on edge. You and your patrol partner exchange a look, and your hands tighten on the reins. The track eventually leads to a small hamlet. The houses crouched low against the wind, smoke curling from the chimneys despite the rain. The villagers eye you warily, their greetings curt, and you note how quickly they step back from the road, pulling children inside. Whether they're fearful of bandits or simply of knights is hard to say, and you ride on without lingering. Returning to the keep feels like crawling out of a wet blanket, and the moment you cross the gate, you dismount, handing your destrier to the stable hand with a muttered word of thanks. Your armor is slick, the rain running down it in rivulets, and you strip it off in the armory, piece by piece, setting each on the stand to dry. The gambeson is the worst, its sodden weight dragging at your arms as you wrestle it over your head, and you leave it draped across a bench, hoping it will be less clammy by morning. Supper tonight is a blessing thicker pottage, slices of root vegetables softened in the pot, and a heel of fresh bread still warm from the oven end. You eat slowly, letting the heat seep into your bones. Later, you join a few others in the great hall, where the fire roars and the smell of burning oak fills the air. And you listen as one of the older knights recounts the tale of a campaign fought entirely in winter, the snow wastes deep, the armor freezing to the touch. Whether it's true or not, you can't tell. But as the rain drums against the shutters and your limbs ache from the day, you think maybe mud isn't the worst thing in the world after all. By the time you return to your mattress, the barracks is quieter, the damp air still clinging to everything, and you curl under your blanket, listening to the rain soften, then fade, replaced by the creak of timbers and the steady breathing of the men around you. Sleep comes slowly, your mind still pacing the wet roads beyond the walls. The morning breaks with a sky that looks as if it has been scrubbed too hard, a pale washed-out blue, streaked with the faintest wisps of cloud, the kind of day where the cold air feels sharper than the steel you carry. You roll from your straw mattress, and your back complains in that dull, familiar way, a reminder of the chainmail's weight yesterday and the hours of slogging through mud. Your gambeson is dry, though stiff from where the dampness had hardened it, and pulling it on is like trying to shrug into a wooden board. Outside, the yard glitters with a faint frost, each blade of grass rimmed with tiny ice crystals that crunch faintly underfoot, and your breath puffs white in the air. The drill master has decided it's a perfect morning for sparring drills, which means no hiding behind the rhythm of mounted work, EOLB, in the lists with nothing but your sword shield and the faint hope that your opponent is as stiff and sluggish as you feel. The lists are a rectangular space ringed with low fencing, the ground packed dirt and dusted with frost, and you step into it with your shield up, eyes narrowing against the low winter sun. Your first opponent is one of the younger knights, quicker than you, but not as heavy in his strikes, and the first clash of your blades sends a jolt up your arm. You circle each other, boots scraping, the sound of steel on steel ringing sharp in the cold air, and you duck a blow that would have rung your helm like a bell. Historians still argue whether training in full armor truly prepared knights for real battle, or if it merely dulled their reflexes with the sheer weight of it. But you know from experience that the moment you forget the drag of your armor is the moment you leave yourself open. The fight ends with a quick feint to the left and a hook of your shield that sends your opponent stumbling, and you offer him a hand up before stepping out to wait for your next match. Between bouts, you shift from foot to foot, keeping the blood moving, your fingers flexing inside the stiff leather gloves. The sun climbs higher, and though the air stays cold, the frost underfoot begins to soften, making the footing less certain. In the lull, you hear a grizzled veteran telling a new recruit that in some far-off desert warriors coat their swords in a paste of ground glass and resin to make even the smallest cut deadly a trick he claims to have seen with his own eyes. Though whether it's truth or tavern-born tale is anyone's guess. Your second match is harder, against a knight with a reach advantage and a knack for driving you toward the edge of the lists. The blows ring out in quick succession, your shield arm aching as you catch each strike, waiting for the opening that finally comes when he overextends on a high cut. You duck under and step in close, your pommel striking his mail-clad ribs just hard enough to make him grunt and yield. By the time the drill master calls an end to the session, your breath is coming fast, and your arms feel like lead. A quick meal in the hall-bread crusts, soft cheese, and a bowl of thin broth does little to restore your energy. But there's no time for lingering. The afternoon's duty takes you beyond the keep's walls again, this time on foot, with a small party sent to inspect a bridge on the far side of the river. After rumors of damage from last week's rains, the walk is long, the road winding through bare-branched woods where the winter light filters in pale and cold. The river itself is swollen, rushing fast, the wooden bridge creaking underfoot. As you test each plank, 2 boards show signs of splitting, and you note the repairs needed before continuing on. It's on the return trip that you encounter a traveling merchant's cart, one wheel mired in a muddy rut. You and your fellows push and strain until the wheel comes free, the merchant offering you a small packet of dried figs in thanks. The sweetness is a shock after weeks of salted meat and pottage, and you savor them slowly as you walk. By the time you reach the keep again, the sun is sinking, staining the sky with streaks of orange and rose, and the torches at the gate are already lit. You unbuckle your armor in the armory, the warm air within a welcome change from the chill outside, and you take your time oiling your sword and checking the rivets on your shield. Supper is heartier. Tonight, chunks of lamb in a thick stew, with a crusty loaf that has passed around the tableland. You eat in companionable silence with the others, the only sound the crackle of the fire. Later, as you make your way to your bunk, you pass 2 squires whispering about an omen seen in the woods. White stag vanishing into the trees without a sound, and you find yourself half hoping it's true, if only for the break in the routine it might bring. Sleep comes more easily tonight, your limbs tired but not aching, and the quiet of the barracks wraps around you like a thick, warm cloak. The morning comes reluctantly, as if even the sun hesitates to face another day in this damp, bone-chilling world you call home, and when you open your eyes, it's to the dim gray of dawn leaking through the narrow slit of your chamber window, cold air pressing against your skin like an unwelcome hand. And your first conscious thought is that the fire in the brazier has died during the night, leaving you to crawl reluctantly from the nest of rough wool blankets into the frigid embrace of the stone room. Your breath curling in faint clouds before your face. You dress quickly, pulling on hose and tunic, then shrugging into your thick surcoat, still smelling faintly of horse sweat from yesterday's ride. And as you step into the corridor, the castle's morning noises are already alive boots scuffing on worn stone. A squire muttering curses as he drops something metallic, the echoing clank of a pail as a servant heads toward the kitchens. Down in the great hall, the smell of smoke from the central hearth mingles with the temps of yesterday's meat fat, and you make your way to the trestle tables where a simple breakfast waits: stale bread softened with broth, a few strips of salt pork if you're lucky, and a cup of small ale to wash it down. Conversation is muted, most men still shaking off the last of their sleep. But a murmur of talk near the far end of the table catches your ear. Something about sheep gone missing from the outer grazing lands, 3 of them taken in the night without a trace. Historians still argue whether medieval lords genuinely cared for such small matters or simply treated them as excuses to exercise authority. But you know well that the loss of animals can mean hardship for the entire manor. So when your name is called to ride out with a small party to investigate, you nod and finish your meal without complaint. Out in the yard, the air bites at your cheeks, the mud beneath your boots, half frozen from the night, and you make for the stables where your destrier stamps, impatiently tossing its head as you tighten the girth and check the iron shoes for wear. The others mount up as well, a mix of seasoned men-at-arms and fresh-faced squires. And soon the gatehouse creaks open to release you into the countryside. The first part of the journey is familiar, winding road between frost-hardened fields, past the same cottages whose thatched roofs sag a little more each winter, past the same crooked wooden cross planted where the road forks. A few villagers wave as you pass, though most simply watch in silence, their faces set against the cold. Beyond the village, the land begins to roll gentle hills dotted with bare trees, their skeletal branches scratching at the pale sky, and the hooves of your horses drum a steady rhythm on the frozen ground, a sound that might almost lull you into ease, if not for the purpose of your ride. After several miles, you reach the edge of a small wood where the shepherd who sent the warning is waiting. His cap clutched in his hands, eyes darting nervously toward the dark tree line. He tells you the animals vanished between the moon's rising and its setting. No signs of struggle, no blood, no tracks leading away except for strange hoof prints, unlike any he's seen. You follow him into the pasture, the ground here churned by the feet of the remaining flock. And soon you find them prints, deep enough to have been made by a large beast, yet the spacing is wrong for a horse, and the edges are oddly sharp. The others mutter among themselves, and one man makes the sign of the cross. Historians still debate whether such prints in medieval records were ever genuine or were simply the product of fearful imaginations. But in this moment, with the frost crunching under your boots and the mist curling low over the grass, you can't deny there's something uncanny about them. You decide to follow the trail, leading your horse on foot into the woods, where the light dims and the smell of damp earth rises to meet you. The prints weave between trees, across a shallow stream swollen from recent rains, and then climb a small rise where the undergrowth grows thick. At the top you find a clearing, and here the mystery deepens, a ring of blackened stones marking the remains of a fire, still faintly warm to the touch, a broken clay jug lying nearby, and a length of rope curled in the grass like a sleeping snake. Whoever was here left in a hurry. A fringe detail that might amuse some future historian is the sight of a charred, half-eaten turnip lying near the fire, a reminder that even thieves need to eat. You scan the tree line, but see no movement, only the steady drift of mist between the trunks. And with daylight already beginning to fade, you decide to return and report what you found. The ride back is slower, the silence among your companions heavy, broken only by the creak of leather and the occasional snort from a horse. By the time you reach the keep, The sky has sunk into a bruised purple, and the first drops of rain are falling. Inside the gate, you hand your reins to a stable boy and make your way straight to the great hall, where the fire roars in the hearth and the smell of roasting pork hangs in the air. Supper is a welcome comfort, thick slices of meat with barley and onions in broth, and the warmth slowly seeps back into your limbs as you sit among your fellow knights, swapping small jokes about the day's ride and laughing at the memory of the squire who last week tried to shoe a horse backward. Later, as the hall empties, you linger by the fire, staring into the coals, while your thoughts circle back to those strange hoofprints and the vanished sheep. In your mind's eye, you see again the blackened stones, the broken jug, the rope lying in the grass. And you can't help but feel that you've only glimpsed the edge of something larger, something that will pull you back into the woods before long. Eventually, fatigue wins, and you climb the stairs to your chamber, shedding your damp cloak and crawling beneath the rough blankets. But sleep is slow to come, your thoughts restless with the weight of unfinished business. And even when you do drift off, the dreams that find you are full of shifting shadows, flickering fires, and the sound of unseen hooves moving just beyond your sight. Dawn comes heavy and gray, the kind of morning that feels less like a new beginning and more like a continuation of yesterday. Damp, fatigue, and when you pull yourself from your bed, the air is sharp enough to bite at your nose, urging you to move quickly. The brazier has burned out again, leaving the chamber cold enough that your breath curls in the dim light. And as you dress, the quiet creak of the floorboards under your boots seems loud in the otherwise silent keep. Down in the yard, the smell of wet hay and horse sweat greets you, the ground still slick from the rain that fell through the night, turning every step into a calculated dance to avoid sinking into the muck. Today's orders are already waiting. A messenger arrived late last night from the neighboring Lord S. estate, with word that a small border dispute has flared up again. Historians still argue whether such disputes were genuinely about land or merely thin excuses for asserting dominance. But either way, it means you LLB, spending the better part of the day riding out to meet the other party's representatives. You break your fast quickly oat, porridge sweetened with a precious spoonful of honey, a wedge of hard cheese, and a cup of weak ale to chase it down. Then make for the stables where your destrier stamps, impatiently eager for the road. Saddling the beast is a ritual by now. The practiced movements of tightening the girth, checking the bridle, and running your hands along the legs to ensure the iron shoes are still sound. The other knights join you in the yard, their cloaks pulled tight against the cold, faces set in the kind of expression that says they'd rather be anywhere else, but have no choice. The gatehouse creaks open, and you ride out, hooves drumming on the frozen earth as the castle falls away behind you. The road winds through frost-touched fields, where the last of the autumn stubble pokes through the soil, and here and there you pass a peasant trudging along with a bundle of firewood or a basket of turnips, their eyes following you with a mixture of wariness and curiosity. Soon you reach the low hills that mark the edge of your lord's domain, their slopes dotted with patches of bare trees and the occasional grazing sheep. And beyond them lies the disputed strip of land, little more than a handful of acres, but precious enough to fight over when resources are scarce. Waiting for you, there are the other lord's men, a half-dozen mounted figures in mail and surcoats, marked with their crest, and as you approach, the air between the two groups feels taut, stretched thin with unspoken challenge. The meeting begins with formal greetings, stiff and polite, but it doesn't take long for the tone to sour. Words about ancient agreements are exchanged. Accusations of trespass muttered with just enough volume to be heard. And more than once, you see a hand drift toward a sword hilt before being pulled back. You keep your own expression neutral, watching the faces of the other party for any sign of intent, noting the way one man's eyes flick repeatedly toward the hills to the north as if expecting someone or something to appear there. Eventually, the lords themselves agree to a temporary compromise, promising to send surveyors in the coming weeks, though you know well enough that such promises can dissolve like mist under the morning sun. The meeting disperses without bloodshed, which is perhaps the best outcome anyone could have hoped for. And as you turn your horse for home, you feel the tightness in your chest begin to ease. On the ride back, conversation flows more icily among your companions, shifting to lighter topics, tales of past hunts, rumors about a merchant caravan carrying spices from the east, and a particularly ridiculous account from one knight who swears he once saw a goose steal a loaf of bread from a baker's window. A quirky detail, but in a world often dark and uncertain, such moments of absurdity are welcome. By the time the castle comes into view again, the sun is already dipping toward the horizon, its pale light leading into the clouds, and the cold has deepened to the point where your fingers ache even through your gloves. Inside the walls, you hand off your horse to the stable hands and head straight to the great hall, where the fire roars in the hearth and the smell of roasting game promises comfort. Supper tonight is venison stew thickened with barley, served alongside trenchers, of course, bread to soak up the rich broth. And as you eat, the warmth seeps back into your bones, loosening the knot of tension in your shoulders. Later, after the meal, you find yourself drawn to the battlements, climbing the narrow stair to stand above the gatehouse, looking out over the darkening fields. The wind is sharp up here, carrying with it the faint smell of wood smoke from the village below. And in the fading light, you can just make out a line of torches moving along the far road, a merchant caravan, perhaps, or a group of pilgrims braving the cold for some distant shrine. You watch them until they vanish into the night, their light swallowed by the dark. And for a moment, you feel the vastness of the world beyond your walls, the endless miles of unknown roads and unspoken stories. When you finally descend and return to your chamber, the brazier has been refilled, and the warmth is a small mercy. You strip off your damp cloak, hang it to dry, and sink into bed, the rough wool blankets pulling close around you as your eyes grow heavy. Yet even as you drift towards sleep, your thoughts linger on the borderlands, on the wary glances and half-spoken threats, and you know deep down that this matter is far from resolved. In time, perhaps soon, you'll be called back to those same frost-covered hills, and when that day comes, the outcome may not be so bloodless. The morning begins not with the gentle stir of sunlight slipping through your window, but with the sharp, metallic clang of the watch bell echoing from the courtyard below. A sound that jolts you upright before your mind is even fully awake. There's no mistaking that rhythm. It isn't the slow, ceremonial toll used to mark the hour, but the urgent, fast peal that means trouble. You throw on your tunic and boots in the half-light, your fingers fumbling at the laces as you try to shake off the fog of sleep, and by the time you step into the corridor, the castle is already alive with movement. Pages sprint past, carrying messages. Guards clatter down the stairs in half-fastened armor, and the cold air streaming in through the arrow slits bites at your skin. Out in the yard, the source of the commotion becomes clear. A rider has just come in from the south, his horse foaming and mud splattered from the hard ride, and he is leaning heavily against the pommel as if the saddle is the only thing holding him upright. You make your way toward the small knot of people gathered around him, catching fragments of his hurried words: raiders fire, livestock driven off, a hamlet left in chaos. Historians still argue whether such raids were more the work of opportunistic bandits or officially sanctioned. Small wars meant to test an enemy's defenses, but to the people whose homes were taken and whose fields were torched, the distinction is meaningless. You're ordered to ride out immediately with a small detachment, and the mood among the men is grim as you ready your gear. The South Road is a treacherous one in winter, a winding ribbon of dirt that turns to a sucking mire after days of rain. And as your destrier's hooves churn through it, you feel each slow mile like a weight pressing into your spine. The sky above is low and iron gray, and the wind carries the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke, the latter growing stronger as you press on. By midday, you crest a rise and see it, the hamlet, or what's left of it. The thatch roofs have been blackened to skeletal frames, smoke still rising from the smoldering remains, and a few figures pick through the wreckage with the hollow, stunned movements of those who haven't yet begun to process what's happened. You dismount and begin to question them, learning little beyond the fact that the attackers struck quickly, came from the woods to the east, and vanished back the same way with their plunder. The tracks they left are muddled both by the chaos of the raid and the churned mud. But you know enough of this land to guess. Where they might have gone, there's an old, disused mill by the river that's been a hideout for thieves before. You set off in that direction with 3 men, the rest staying behind to tend the wounded and begin salvaging what they can. The road narrows into a muddy trail, hemmed in by bare-limbed trees, whose branches claw at the gray sky, and the sound of the river grows louder until at last you see the mill, its wheel long broken, the building slumping against a bank like a drunk leaning on a friend. Outside, the ground is a tangle of hoofprints and boot marks, and your hand goes instinctively to your sword as you signal the others to fan out. The interior smells of damp grain and unwashed bodies, and in the gloom you make out the shapes of sacks of stolen goods, and yes, the flash of steel as one of the raiders realizes you're not supposed to be here. The fight is short, messy, and close. You duck a wild swing, shove hard, and feel the jolt travel up your arm as your blade connects. In moments, it's over. The survivors bound, and the goods they hadn't yet moved piled near the door. Among the loot is a curious object, a bronze cup worked in a style you don't recognize, far too fine for anything local. A quirky tidbit for another time, perhaps, but for now you simply note it and pack it away for later examination. By the time you ride back to the hamlet, the day is waning, the smoke from the ruins mixing with the scent of evening cook fires from distant farmsteads, and the people greet you with weary relief. The goods you recovered won't undo the damage, but they'll help, and the captured raiders will face the Lord's justice. Back at the castle that night, you sit in the hall with a bowl of broth in your hands, staring into the fire as the crackle and hiss of burning wood fills the space. You think of the faces in the hamlet, of the cold precision of the attack, and you know this one, TB, the last time you resent out in response to such destruction. Winter is hard, and desperation makes men bold. Soon enough, someone else will try their luck. When you finally climb to your chamber, the warmth of the brazier is welcome, but your mind churns with unanswered questions. Who armed those men, why they struck when they did, and what other troubles might be brewing beyond your lord's reach. You lie there listening to the distant sound of the watch bell, marking the hour, and the night feels long indeed. The order to ride out comes before dawn, in that gray hour, when the world feels half asleep, and the chill seeps into your bones, as though it has been lying in wait all night, ready to wrap itself around you the moment you open your eyes. You've been told your task is simple escort, a convoy of grain wagons to a distant monastery. The sort of errand that sounds dull until you remember that in a medieval winter, food is as precious as gold and as dangerous to carry as any chest of coins. People have been hanged for stealing less than a loaf of bread, and here you'll be hauling enough grain to feed 100 mouths for months. The air outside is sharp enough to make your teeth ache, frost crusting over the yard as you mount your destrier, the breath from both you and the animal rising in ghostly plumes. Behind you, the wagons creak into motion, drawn by broad-backed draft horses whose coats glisten with frost, and the driver's peasant men with cracked hands and hunched shoulders glanced about nervously, their eyes darting toward every shadow as though expecting trouble to leap out. You ride at the head, the leather of your saddle stiff with cold, your gloved hand resting on the pommel of your sword. And though the first hour passes quietly, you can't shake the feeling of eyes on you from the tree line. Historians still argue whether medieval roads were truly this perilous, or if chroniclers liked to embellish tales of brigands for drama. But as the forest swallows, you hold branches arching overhead. Like skeletal ribs, you suspect the truth needs no embellishment. The sounds are different and here muted, dampened, as if the trees themselves are listening. You hear the occasional snap of frost breaking under hoof or wheel, the distant tapping of a woodpecker, the sigh of wind stirring the brittle leaves. Around mid-morning, the road begins to climb, and at a bend, you spot something unusual. A half-buried stone marker, its surface, lichen-covered, yet still faintly carved with what looks like the crowned figure of a saint or maybe a forgotten king. You wonder how many centuries it stood here, silently watching over travelers who, like you, have squinted at its worn face and tried to guess its meaning. One of your men mutters that it's bad luck to pass such stones without leaving an offering, and though you smile faintly at the superstition, you notice he discreetly drops a small coin at its base before riding on. Climb is slow going, the frost melting into slick mud under the hooves and wheels, forcing you more than once to dismount and heave at a stuck axle with the drivers. Your gauntlets slip on the wet wood, and the cold mud squelches unpleasantly around your boots, but the wagons inch forward. By noon, clouds have begun to gather, gray smudges across the horizon that promise rain, and the wind picks up, whistling through the branches with a sound like distant voices. You keep your men alert, but conversation drifts to mundane topics. How the ale was last night, whether the monastery's kitchens are as generous as the rumors claim. You read just thinking that perhaps the road will stay quiet when the first arrow hisses past your ear, burying itself in the mud with a dull thunk. Instinct kicks in before thought, your hand snapping to your sword voice, barking orders as a dozen shapes burst from the undergrowth on the right-hand side, men in mismatched scraps of armor. Some in little more than thick cloaks, their faces hidden behind scarves or rough-spun hoods. They shout as they charge, a ragged, hungry sound, and the drivers cry out, hauling on their reins. Another volley of arrows follows, one striking the side of the lead wagon, splintering wood. You wheel your destrier to the flank, parrying a spear thrust from the first attacker to reach you, the clang of metal ringing sharp in your ears. The fight is ugly and close. There's no room for fancy maneuvers among the wagons. A man swings an axe toward your leg, and you feel the rush of air as you jerk back, countering with a cut that glances off his shoulder. Somewhere to your left, one of your men yells in pain, the sound cut short by the thud of a body hitting mud. You push forward, shouting to rally them, and slowly the attackers begin to falter. One drops his weapon and runs, then another, until the thicket swallows them back as suddenly as it spat them out. Two of their number lie on the ground, one groaning, clutching a bleeding leg, the other still as stone. You don't chase. You know the forest is their territory, and leading your men into it would be inviting disaster. Instead, you get the drivers moving again, aware that the longer you linger, the more time you give for them to regroup. The rain starts as a drizzle, darkening the dirt road, then thickens into a steady downpour. The sound of it drumming on the wagon covers, almost drowning out the creak of the wheels. The last stretch to the monastery is a narrow lane flanked by crumbling stone walls, the sort that might once have marked the Lord's land centuries ago, now half swallowed by moss. You catch your first glimpse of the monastery through the curtain of rain tar, squared towers of dark stone, the slate roofs gleaming wet, banners hanging limp against the walls. At the gate, a hooded figure peers down, bow in hand. But recognition softens his stance, and the massive wooden doors begin to creak open. Inside, the change is immediate. The air feels warmer, scented faintly with incense and baking bread, the muffled sound of chanting drifting from somewhere deep within. The monks move with quiet efficiency, unloading the grain and storing it in vast, dimly lit chambers lined with barrels and sacks. One, an elderly brother with a stooped back and eyes that still gleam sharply, thanks you and presses something into your palm, a small wooden charm carved in the shape of a dove. It's simple, the work of an unpracticed hand, but it feels unexpectedly significant. You tuck it into your belt pouch, unsure whether out of politeness or some deeper instinct. Supper in the refectory is a humble feast by knightly standards. Thick vegetable stew ladled into wooden bowls, coarse bread with a hint of sourness, an ale that's sharp on the tongue but warming as it goes down. You sit with your men, listening to the rise and fall of monkish conversation, punctuated by the occasional crackle from the hearth. Every so often, the wind gusts against the shutters, reminding you that outside these walls, the road is dark and wet and dangerous, and you have to ride it again tomorrow, only this time without the wagons to slow you, but also without their bulk as cover if trouble comes calling. For now, though, you let yourself rest, armor off, sword propped beside your bench, the heat from the fire seeping into your bones. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls the hour, slow and solemn, and you think of the raiders melting back into the forest, of the carved stone by the roadside, of the dove-shaped charm now resting in your pouch. Outside, the rain falls steadily, and in that rhythm there's something almost like a lullaby, a reminder that in this world of sudden violence and cold duty, moments of warmth are to be held on to fiercely, however fleeting they may be. The morning after the monastery's quiet refuge feels like waking from a strange, layered dream, where the warmth of the hearth and the faint scent of baking bread are still clinging to your memory. Yet the reality of your duties presses in as soon as you stir. You rise early, the stone chamber cold under your bare feet, and begin the practiced ritual of dressing for the road. Tunic first, still faintly warm from the fire where it hung overnight. Chainmail next, the familiar weight settling across your shoulders like an old friend who was also a constant reminder of danger. Finally, your surcoat, now damp again from the mist that seems to cling to everything in these hills. The monks have packed provisions for udents, loaves of rye bread wrapped in cloth, a wheel of hard cheese, a small jug of watered wine, and the elderly brother who gave you the carved dove charm last night clasps your hand in farewell. For peace, he says simply, his voice carrying both blessing and warning. And you find yourself wondering what he's seen in his long years behind these walls that make such a gift necessary. The rain has stopped, but the sky remains heavy, clouds layered in slow-moving sheets of gray that promise more before long. The road south from the monastery is narrower than the one you came in on, twisting between low, mossy walls, and occasionally plunging into dense stands of beech and oak where the branches interlace so thickly that even the weak winter light struggles to break through. Your horse's hooves sound loud in the hush, the occasional jingle of tack or creak of leather startling small birds from the undergrowth. You ride with your men in a looser formation, now their shoulders hunched against the cold their eyes, scanning the tree line out of habit more than fear. Though you all know that danger has a habit of appearing where least expected. About an hour into the journey, you come across a peculiar sight, a small shrine by the roadside, little more than a niche in the stone wall, sheltering a crude wooden figure painted in faded reds and golds. It's difficult to tell whether it's meant to be a saint or perhaps some older pre-Christian spirit that has been half-adopted into the new faith. Offerings lie at its base, wilted flowers, a handful of coins, and what looks like a child's carved toy horse. One of your younger men crosses himself. Another mutters something about not angering the spirits of the road. You consider adding the wooden dove from your pouch, but decide against it, feeling strangely protective of the token. The road begins to climb, winding up into a ridge that offers a rare view of the land below. Rolling fields pale with frost, a distant ribbon of river glinting under the dim light, and beyond that, the dark smudge of more forest. You can see faint smoke rising from what might be a village, though it's too far to be certain. It's easy to imagine how in summer this would be a beautiful place, green and gold under a generous sun, but in winter it feels austere, almost watchful. As you descend into the next valley, the path narrows to a muddy track that threads between tangled thickets. The mud here is deep, sucking greedily at your horse's hooves, and twice you have to pause to help a man free his mount. Somewhere ahead, you hear the trickle of running water, and soon the path emerges beside a small stone bridge arching over a stream. The bridge is older than the monastery, perhaps older than the kingdom itself, its stones worn smooth by centuries of hooves and boots and cartwheels. A faint carving of intertwined knots runs along the parapet, half hidden by moss. You rein in to study it, tracing a gloved finger over the pattern, and you can almost hear the voices of the builders echoing faintly across the ages. Though of course, it's just the sound of the stream rushing below. Bridges like this are the lifelines of the realm, yet also the choke points where tolls are demanded, or ambushes laid, and you find yourself glancing around the nearby trees out of habit. Today, though, the only watchers seem to be a pair of crows perched on a bare branch. their black eyes following your passage with what feels like quiet judgment. You press on, the road curving gently until it spills into open farmland. The fields divided by low hedges and dotted here and there with grazing sheep. The shepherds, wrapped in rough cloaks, give you cautious nods as you pass, their dogs trotting close at their heels. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolls the hour, the sound carrying thin and sweet on the cold air. You're thinking perhaps you'll make the next village before nightfall when the wind shifts, bringing with it the smell of wood smoke, thick, acrid, and wrong. A turn in the road reveals the source, a farmhouse set back from the lane, its roof partially collapsed, blackened beams still smoking. The yard is empty, no animals in sight, and the ground is churned with prints, some hoof, some boot, all fresh. You dismount, signaling your men to spread out, and step carefully toward the ruin. The door hangs askew, its hinges twisted, and inside you find the main room gutted, the hearth cold, a scattering of broken crockery on the floor. There's no sign of the occupants, and that absence feels heavier than finding bodies might have. Your men exchange glances. One suggests raiders, another mutters about soldiers taking what they please. You know either is possible, and neither bodes well for the road ahead. You mark the location in your mind, something to report to your lord. When you return, then urge your company onward, the mood now taut with unspoken unease. The road curves through another patch of woodland, this one darker, the trees taller and older, their trunks so thick it would take 3 men to encircle them. The undergrowth is sparse here, the ground carpeted with last autumn's leaves, and the silence feels deeper, almost expectant. It's here that you notice movement, a flicker between the trees, low to the ground. You signal a halt, scanning the shadows, and after a moment, a figure steps into view. A young woman in a tattered green cloak, her face pale but her eyes sharp. She raises a hand, palm out, in a gesture that's neither hostile nor exactly friendly. The road ahead isn't safe, she says, her voice low, almost hoarse. She glances behind her as though expecting someone to follow, then adds, "They're waiting at the ford." You ask who, but she shakes her head. "Not my fight, but yours, maybe." Before you can press her, she's turned and melted back into the trees, her cloak flashing once like a green leaf in the gloom, before vanishing entirely. Your men shift uneasily, glancing toward you for orders. It's tempting to dismiss her as a mad wanderer or a trickster, yet something in her tone and the still smoking ruin you past makes you decide to at least approach the ford with caution. You press on, the air growing colder as the road drops toward the river valley. When you reach the ford, you see at once what she meant. 6 men loitering on the far bank, their stance too casual to be innocent, weapons half hidden but unmistakable. They watch as you approach, and one steps forward, calling out that the crossing is closed unless you can pay a toll in silver. His smile is thin, and the others spread out slightly, a not-so-subtle attempt at encirclement. You know there's no legitimate toll here, and that to pay would be to invite more such demands on the road ahead. Your hand rests on your sword, but you also know that a fight in the shallows would be risky. Horses lose footing, and the current, though shallow, could drag a man under if he falls. You weigh your options, the cold water rushing between you like the measured beat of a clock counting down. Then, without a word, you urge your horse forward into the ford, your men following suit. The leader's smirk falters, his hand tightening on his spear. And for a moment, the world narrows to the splash of water, the creak of leather, the thud of hooves on the submerged stones. They hesitate, perhaps surprised by your boldness, and in that hesitation lies your chance. You pass through their loose line, keeping your gaze locked on the leader, and the tension hums in the air like the drawn string of a bow. Then, perhaps deciding that the odds are not as favorable as they seemed, he steps back, waving his men off. Another time, he says, though whether it's a promise or a threat is hard to tell. You ride on without looking back. The river behind you and the next stretch of road stretching out ahead like a challenge yet to be named. The road beyond the ford curves steadily southward, hugging the edge of the river. As it winds between steep banks and tangled groves, the water, now a constant presence at your side, glinting here and there between the trees, like a strip of tarnished silver under the dim winter sky. The air feels heavier after the encounter, the kind of thick, watchful quiet that follows an avoided fight. And though your men try to ride as if nothing happened, their eyes flick more often toward the undergrowth, their hands resting a little closer to their weapons. The riverbank is dotted with willows, their long bare branches swaying in the wind, whispering against one another with a sound like the faint hiss of distant rain. In summer, this might be a pleasant stretch of road with the breeze off the water, carrying the scent of wildflowers and the hum of bees. But now, the smell is of cold, mud, and decaying leaves, and the only movement is the occasional fish breaking the surface or the silent swoop of a heron gliding low over the current. An hour passes in this steady rhythm, hooves on frozen earth, breath clouding in the air, until the river bends sharply west and the road leaves it behind, climbing a low rise into open ground where the wind cuts sharper, unbroken by trees. Here you can see far ahead, the land rolling away in muted browns and grays, scattered with the skeletons of last year's crops and the occasional lonely farmstead. Smoke rises from one such farm in the distance, the thin gray thread curling into the sky, and you find yourself wondering if it's the honest smoke of a hearth or the harsher kind left by raiders. You make for it anyway. The road here, more of a rutted track that crests the rise and dips toward the buildings. As you draw closer, you can see the place's intact 3 low thatched houses clustered around a central yard, a barn with its doors open, and a stack of chopped firewood neatly piled against the barn wall. A woman stands in the yard, scattering grain for chickens, and though she watches your approach with the wary stillness of someone used to measuring strangers, she doesn't retreat. When you rein in, she nods once, her expression unreadable, and you ask about the road ahead. You'll find the market town by nightfall if you keep your pace, she says, voice clipped but not unfriendly. But the south road's been busier than it ought to be. Men in armor, not all flying banners, you'd know. Some folk keep to the fields now instead of the road. Her gaze shifts briefly toward the horizon, as if weighing whether to say more. Then she turns back to her work without another word. You thank her and move on, your mind turning over her warning like a coin in your palm, feeling the weight of it without quite knowing its full value yet. The road widens slightly as it approaches the town, and the traffic grows thicker. A cart laden with sacks of grain, its driver hunched against the wind. A pair of monks on foot, their robes muddy to the knee. A boy driving a small herd of pigs that scatter squealing at the sight of your horses. The town itself comes into view as the light begins to fade up. jumble of timbered houses clustered around a central square, the peaked roof of a church rising above them, and beyond that, the faint outline of a palisade wall. The air carries the smell of cooking fires and the sharper temps of tanneries, and you can hear the faint clatter of hooves and voices even before you reach the gate. The guards there are young and tired-looking, their spears propped against the wall, and they wave you through after a cursory glance, more interested in their own conversation than in the travelers passing by. Inside, the market square is still lively, despite the failing light. Merchants call out their wares: salt fish, bolts of rough wool, baskets of onions, and the crowd jostles and shifts around you, the noise and color almost overwhelming. After the quiet of the road, you dismount, leading your horse through the press, your men fanning out slightly to watch for purses. A stall near the church catches your eye, its table laid with small brass charms, each in the shape of a different animal or symbol. The seller, a bent man with bright eyes, claims they ward off ill luck on the road, though whether by faith or mere suggestion is anyone's guess. You think of the wooden dove in your pouch, but don't take it out. Instead, handing over a coin for a brass key opens doors unseen. The man says with a wink. You continue through the square toward the inn, a sturdy building with a sign depicting a black hound against a red field. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of roasting meat and the murmur of conversation, the heat from the central hearth a welcome relief. The innkeeper, a broad man with a beard like a gray cloud, greets you with the efficiency of someone who's seen every kind of traveler and knows what each needs: food, drink, and a bed in that order. He leads you to a table near the fire, and soon your men are eating and drinking, the tension of the day easing with each mouthful. Yet even in this warmth, you can't quite shake the feeling of being watched not by any one person, but by the town itself, as if it's quietly taking your measure. As the evening wears on, you notice a man in a dark cloak lingering near the door, speaking to different groups in turn. When he finally approaches your table, he doesn't sit, but leans in just enough to be heard over the noise. If you're bound for the southern road, he says, you'll want to know about the bridge at Carroll's Ford. You ask what about it, and he glances around before continuing. It's held now by men who serve no lord but themselves. They've been taxing traders, and those who refuse don't come back. His eyes flick to the brass key at your belt, and for a moment you wonder if he's sizing you up for more than just conversation. Then he straightens, murmurs something that might be a farewell, and slips away into the crowd. The rest of the evening passes without incident, though his warning joins the farmer S-wife's words in the growing list of concerns for tomorrow's journey. When you finally retire to the small chamber above the common room, the sounds of the market and the smell of the hearth still cling to you, and your dreams that night are full of winding roads, shadowed bridges, and the distant murmur of voices you can't quite understand. Morning comes, pale and cold, a thin frost tracing the edges of the inn's windows, and you rise to find the square already busy, carts rattling over the cobbles, and vendors calling their prices. You take your breakfast quickly, the innkeeper wishing you safe travels with the practiced cheer of someone who knows how little such words can actually promise. The road out of the town is busier than the one you entered by, with more traders and a few mounted men in mismatched armor. The air feels sharper here, the wind cutting across open ground, and you keep your pace steady, the memory of both warnings pressing you onward, toward Carroll's Ford. Somewhere ahead, you know, Decisions will need to be made, and the road will offer no easy answers. The road south from the market town starts wide and well kept. The cobbles laid down in some older, richer time, now smoothed and dulled by countless wheels and hooves, but still a far cry from the rutted mud tracks of the countryside. The early morning sun glances low across the land, catching in the frost so that every field and fence post seems to glow faintly, as if lit from within. Traders move steadily along this stretch, some in small caravans, others alone, their carts piled high with everything from bolts of cloth to barrels of salted meat. The rhythm of travel here is almost lulling, but you don't allow yourself to drift into comfort. There is too much talk of trouble ahead, and every crest in the road feels like the moment before a curtain rises. Your men are quieter than usual, their breath visible in the cold air, their eyes scanning the passing hedgerows and the occasional copse of trees. Twice you pass mounted groups that could be soldiers or could be something less official each time their the same brief exchange of looks, the calculation of strength and intent, before both parties ride on without incident. As the morning wears into afternoon, the land begins to slope gently downward, and you see the glint of water in the distance, the river that marks Carrow's Ford, a place that in better years would be just another crossing on the road to the southern provinces, but now looms in your mind as the day's trial. The bridge comes into view slowly, first as a darker line against the water, then as a low span of stone supported by 3 squat arches. On the near side stands a wooden watch structure, little more than a platform with a roof, but enough to signal that someone means to keep an eye on the crossing. Even from this distance, you can make out figures moving there, and a few more scattered along the bridge itself. As you draw nearer, the details sharpen. A cluster of men in piecemeal armor, some carrying spears, others leaning on their weapons as if the day were just another one to be passed with idle talk and the occasional toll. They straighten as you approach, the way men do when they smell coin. One steps forward, tall, broad-shouldered, his mail patched and dulled, but still serviceably, calls out in a voice meant to carry. Roads open to those who pay the crossing fee, he says, and the way he says it leaves no doubt about what happens to those who don't. You rein in the river murmuring beneath the bridge and study the man. There's a certain looseness to the group, a lack of uniform that marks them more as opportunists than as soldiers sworn to a cause. But that doesn't make them any less dangerous. You ask the price, keeping your tone neutral, and he names a sum high enough to make a merchant balk. Pay, and you pass. Refuse, and, well, he lets the end of the sentence trail off, leaving the rest to imagination. Your men shift in their saddles, hands straying toward sword hilts, but you hold up a hand to still them. A quick glance behind shows other travelers waiting at a distance, clearly hoping someone else will resolve the matter before they try their luck. The wind off the river cuts through your cloak, carrying the damp, cold smell of the water, and you weigh your options. Paying would be the simplest course, but it would also mark you as a willing target for any other such tolls ahead. Forcing your way through might succeed, but it would mean leaving bodies behind and perhaps carrying word of your passage farther than you like. You ask if the toll is for the bridge itself or for the safety of the road beyond, and the tall man grins as if you've told a joke. For both, if you like, he says. Think of it as insurance. His men chuckle, but it's not a pleasant sound. You take a slow breath, feeling the eyes of your own company on you, and make your choice. Whether you pay or not, The exchange leaves its mark. These men will remember you, and the road ahead will remember as well. Once you're across, the land on the far side feels subtly different, not just in the way the light falls or the smell of the air, but in the way the road itself seems more watched, more measured. The trees grow closer here, leaning over the path as if to listen to the passing of each traveler. Now and then you glimpse movement in the undergrowth, but it never resolves into more than a flick of shadow or the rustle of leaves. Late in the afternoon, you pass a shrine at a crossroads, its stone figure worn smooth by time and weather. The base piled with small offerings coins, bits of food, a scrap of ribbon tied to the arm. An old woman tends it, her back bent nearly double, and she pauses in her work to look up as you pass. "Road's not safe ahead," she says, and her voice is like dry leaves. "Keep to the main track and don't stop till you see the walls." You nod, but she has already turned back to her task, as if she's said all she meant to say. Evening finds you approaching the next settlement, a walled town smaller than the one you left this morning. Its gate flanked by torches that throw long orange streaks across the frost. The guards here are sharper, their armor better kept, and they challenge you with the formality of men used to trouble. Once inside, the streets are quiet, most folk already indoors against the cold, though the smell of cooking and the glow of hearth fires seep from shuttered windows. You find the inn without trouble, a modest place, but clean, its sign swinging gently in the wind. The innkeeper gives you a room on the upper floor, and as you eat your supper by the fire, you listen to the low murmur of local talk. Merchants grumbling about tolls, a farmer cursing the loss of a pig to wolves, a pair of travelers whispering about some disturbance in the hills to the east. None of it is urgent enough to pull you from your path, but it all adds to the sense that the road south is narrowing, each mile more fraught than the last. That night, you dream again of the bridge, but this time the water beneath it is black and still, and when you look down, you see not your own reflection, but the faces of those who have not returned. Dawn comes cold and pale, the frost thicker now, and you set out once more, the walls of the town falling away behind you as the road dips into a shallow valley. Somewhere ahead lies the reason for your journey, though the road seems determined to test you at every turn before you reach it. By the time the sun lifts high enough to burn off the morning frost, you've left the valley behind, and the road climbs again, winding through low hills where the soil is thin and the grass sparse, the rocks beneath showing through in pale, jagged ribs. The air here has a different quality, drier, sharper, with a faint mineral temps that catches at the back of your throat. A pair of crows wheel overhead, their calls harsh and almost mocking as they follow your slow progress along the ridge. From up here, the land rolls away, on either side, in muted browns and grays, the only real color coming from the occasional streak of lichen on stone or the faded banners over a farmhouse far below. It's easy to imagine that nothing stirs in these hills, but you've ridden long enough to know better. This kind of country hides as much as it reveals, and you keep your gaze moving, scanning the hollows and shadowed folds for any sign of trouble. Around midday, you crest another rise and see the road dipping sharply into a gorge where a narrow river has cut its way between steep rock faces. A wooden bridge spans the gap, though it looks far older and less sound than the stone crossing at Kara's Ford. The timber's weathered silver and patched in places with mismatched planks. On the near side, the road broadens into a sort of lay-by, and at S there you notice the makeshift camp. A few tents pitched close to the rock wall. A line of horses tethered under a lean-to, and half a dozen figures sitting or standing in loose formation. They're armed, though not heavily, and their gear is a jumble of styles, some pieces clearly scavenged from better-equipped soldiers, others the rough work of local smiths. As you draw closer, one of them steps forward, raising a hand, not in greeting, but in that universal signal to halt. You pull up, letting your men close in around you, and wait for him to speak. "Bridge is out," he says, though you can plainly see it isn't. "Storm last month took half the supports. We're the only ones keeping it standing, so if you want to cross..." He lets the sentence dangle in the cold air, his meaning clear enough. You ask how much, and he names a sum not quite as outrageous as the one at Carrow's Ford, but still steep for such a meager span. You could press him, argue that the bridge belongs to no one, but the way the others shift behind him, hands on weapons, makes it clear they've had that discussion before. Historians still argue whether these sorts of maintenance tolls were a form of local governance in the absence of central control, or simply banditry dressed in a veneer of civic duty. But here and now, it hardly matters. You either pay or you don't cross. After a moment's thought, you toss the man a small purse, enough to meet his price, and a bit more to keep him from taking offense. His expression softens, and he steps aside with a nod, waving you on. The bridge creaks under the weight of your party, the sound carrying up into the gorge walls and back down again until it seems like the timbers are talking among themselves about whether they hold. But they do, and soon you're climbing the far side, the air growing warmer as the gorge falls away behind you. In the next stretch, the land opens into a wide plateau, the road cutting straight across it toward a dark smudge on the horizon that resolves with each passing mile into the clustered roofs and walls of a fortress. You've heard of this place, Sternwick, though never visited. It's said to be a crossroads of sorts, where merchants from the coast meet traders from the mountain passes. And the result is a mix of goods and tongues and tempers unlike anywhere else in the region. As you draw near, the first signs of it appear in the form of scattered outbuildings. A smithy with its chimneys smoking, a row of beehives lined up like squat sentries, a fenced field where a handful of sheep nose through the frost for what grass they can find. Then the road curves, and the walls come into full view, tall, solid, built from the same pale stone as the surrounding hills, but darkened by years of weather and the smoke of countless hearths. The gate is open, but flanked by watchmen in matching surcoats, their halberds planted firmly on the ground. They study you as you approach, but whatever they see convinces them you're no immediate threat, and they step aside to let you pass. Inside the town is alive with sound and movement, traders hawking their wares in a dozen languages, the ring of hammers on metal, the sharp calls of drovers herding animals through narrow lanes. The smells are just as varied: fresh bread from a bakery, the temps of tanned leather, the sharp bite of a dyer's vat. You dismount near the market square, where a raised platform has been set up for some kind of auction. A man in a bright red coat is holding up a silver goblet, extolling its virtues to a crowd that seems more interested in the next lot. Whatever it might be, you linger for a while, letting the energy of the place wash over you. But you're not here to trade. Your goal lies beyond Turnwick, and every hour spent here is another in which the road ahead may change in ways you can control. Still, you can help but note certain things. the way some stalls seem better stocked than others, suggesting quiet alliances with supply caravans. The subtle but constant presence of armed watchmen in the crowd, the slightly too curious gaze of a few individuals who melt away when you glance their way. You take your meal in a tavern off one of the side streets, a place with rough wooden tables and a fire that burns more smoke than flame. The stew is hearty enough, and the ale does its job of washing down the road dust. But you're more focused on the snatches of conversation drifting from the nearby tables. Talk of increased patrols to the east, rumors of a noble's retinue gone missing on the coast road, whispers of an unusually harsh winter coming. Though the old-timers scoff at the idea, one man mentions the mountain pass by name, and you file it away. That's where your road will take you next, and any scrap of information could prove useful. By the time you leave the tavern, the sun is low and the shadows long, stretching like dark fingers across the cobblestones. You retrieve your horse, tighten the girth, and ride out through the western gate, feeling the shift in the air as the noise of the town falls away behind you. The road beyond Turnwick is narrower, less traveled, and almost immediately it begins to climb again, winding between outcrops of stone and clusters of leafless trees. The land here feels older somehow, as if it remembers things that towns have long forgotten. You pass a standing stone carved with runes, so weathered they're almost gone, and though you can't read them, the sight sends a shiver through you. The wind picks up as the light fades, carrying with it the scent of snow, and you find yourself urging your horse to a faster pace, eager to reach whatever shelter lies ahead. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howls, the sound rolling down the slopes and into the hollows like a cold hand on your neck. Night is coming, and with it, the next test of the road. The morning starts with a sky so heavy and low, you half expect it to collapse over you. The air damp and metallic like the breath of some vast unseen beast. The wind pushes against the keep's gates even before they open, rattling the iron bands with a metallic groan. And when you ride out, you feel it cut through the seams of your armor, as though the steel warranty even there. Your orders are to make a full circuit of the northern border. No small task at the best of times. But with the season turning, every mile will be a gamble. Historians still argue whether the so-called Little Ice Age of the late Middle Ages truly brought colder winters, or whether the chroniclers were just particularly fond of dramatic weather stories. But as you watch your breath billow white and thick in front of your visor, you suspect there's truth in the cold's cruelty. You ride with a handful of men, all hunched in their cloaks, the horse's hooves striking the half-frozen ground with a dull, brittle sound. The first miles pass in a kind of silent endurance, your thoughts narrowing to the rhythm of hoofbeats and the constant sting of wind-driven grit against your cheeks. You pass through a stand of bare birch trees, their pale trunks streaked, black with lichen, and remember an old fringed tale told in the barracks, that in certain winters, desperate villagers would strip birch bark to boil into a bitter tea, claiming it could ward off frostbite. No one ever said if it worked, but you can't imagine choosing between that taste and hunger. Mid-morning, the road begins to climb into moorland, a vast sweep of brown grass, peat bogs, and wind-gnawed stones. The air grows sharper here, the wind rising into a constant howl that makes it hard to hear your own thoughts. Somewhere to the east, a shape moves against a ridgeline, too distant to name, and then vanishes behind a knuckled outcrop. You glance to your men, see them glance back, each with that subtle shift in posture that means, stay alert. The weather turns steadily more hostile, The clouds, once merely heavy, descend in shredded curtains of sleet that sting the eyes and turn the ground into a slick patchwork of mud and ice. The horses pick their way carefully, heads down, tails whipping in the wind. At one point, you pass the remains of a signal tower. Its upper half collapsed, the stones dark with moisture. Historians still debate whether such towers truly kept watch year-round or only in times of war, given the expense of manning them. But in this weather, the idea of anyone choosing to live here seems absurd. You push on, the sleet soaking into every gap in your armor, the wet cold seeping deep into your joints, until you feel older than your years. Then, without warning, the moorland drops into a shallow hollow where the wind slackens just enough for you to hear it, the distant rhythm of hooves, not your own. You slow, raise a hand, listening. They're closing in from the east, and when they crest the ridge, you see them clearly. Half a dozen riders, rough-clad weapons at the ready. Not the disciplined charge of Knightsmoor, the desperate, darting approach of men who fight because they have nothing to lose. Bandits in this season are a dangerous breed, driven by hunger more than malice, and that can make them reckless. You wheel your mount toward a cluster of stones and shout for your men to form a line. The first clash comes quickly. They ride straight at you, relying on surprise and numbers. And for a moment, it works. The air is full of the clang of steel and the grunts of exertion, the wind carrying away shouts before they can reach the ear. You parry a wild swing from a curved blade. Feel the shock travel up your arm, then counter with a thrust that sends the attacker reeling. One of your men takes a blow to the helmet and nearly topples, but the line holds, and gradually the attacker's momentum breaks. When they pull back, it's not in retreat, but in wary circling, searching for a weakness. You know better than to give chase in this weather. You regroup, shields angled against the wind, and wait until they decide the fight isn't worth it. When they finally wheel away into the sleet, you let out a breath you didn't realize you were holding. The next leg of the patrol is slower, your muscles aching from the sudden effort and the cold working harder into your bones. You stop briefly at a half-ruined chapel on the edge of the moor, its roof sagging, walls etched with centuries of wind-blown grit. Inside, you find a handful of pilgrims sheltering from the storm, their faces gaunt, fingers wrapped around crude clay cups of thin broth. One offers you a blessing, another warns of worse weather ahead. It's not a surprise. Your own bones could have told you as much, but hearing it aloud makes the journey ahead feel heavier. By late afternoon, the light is fading faster than it should. The sky is a bruise-colored sheet, and the wind carries flecks of snow now, swirling in erratic bursts. Your destination is a small watchtower, still manned by a skeleton garrison, half a league north, but each step feels like wading through invisible resistance. At one point, you pass a frozen pond, where the ice is cracked into strange hexagonal patterns, and you remember a scholarly debate about whether medieval travelers truly trusted frozen water enough to cross it, or if that was an invention of later romantic tales. In this moment, with the wind howling and your mount's hooves slipping even on solid ground, the thought of riding over ice seems laughable. The final approach to the watchtower is a narrow defile between two low hills, and it's here, in the deepening dusk, that you encounter the second threat of the day. Shadows detach themselves from the rocks figures on foot, this time armed with short spears and hatchets, their clothing patched and ragged. They've chosen the ground well. Here, your horses can't maneuver icily, and the footing is treacherous. The fight is desperate and close quarters, the air full of the ragged sound of breathing and the sharp crack of wood against steel. You block a thrust, feel the jolt in your shoulder, and shove the attacker back into the snow. Another man lunges for your reins, but a quick downswing catches him on the arm, sending him sprawling. The wind is in your favor now, driving sleet into their faces, and after a tense few minutes, they break, scattering into the dark. You press on without pause. When the watchtower's light finally appears, a faint yellow glimmer in the grate feels unreal, like something imagined in the haze of exhaustion. The gate is opened by a single guardsman wrapped in mismatched furs, his face red from the cold. Inside, the air is heavy with the scent of smoke and wet wool, the floor strewn with rushes. A fire crackles in the hearth, and the heat, though modest, makes your skin sting as sensation creeps back into your fingers. You strip off your soaked gloves, flexing stiff joints, and someone presses a wooden cup into your hands. The drink inside is hot and bitter, flavored with something herbal, maybe rosemary, maybe something stranger, and the warmth flows outward from your chest. The storm outside rattles the shutters, a constant reminder of how close you came to being caught in it, unprotected. You settle against the wall, letting your eyes close for just a moment, thinking of the road you've traveled, the dangers faced, and the simple truth that survival tonight is worth more than any glory. The wind howls on, uncaring, and you know that by morning, the snow will have buried your tracks entirely. The storm spins itself slowly through the night, its howling easing to a low sigh that slips between the shutters. You wake once to stir the fire, the embers blooming briefly into orange life before settling back into a steady glow. Outside, the world has been remade in white. Every stone, every branch, every uneven patch of ground has been softened under a thick blanket of snow, and the air holds that peculiar stillness that comes only when the wind has finally gone quiet. The garrison stirs in small, slow movements, men reluctant to leave the comfort of furs and blankets, voices hushed as though loud speech might crack the fragile calm. You step outside for a moment, boots crunching in the fresh crust, and draw in a breath so cold it feels pure. The horizon is clear, the distant hills touched with the first pale light of dawn. No tracks mar the snow, not yours, not the bandits, not the horses, as if the events of the previous day have been erased entirely, leaving only the silent proof that something powerful has passed through. A raven sits on the watchtower's highest beam, black against the bright sky, and it watches you without movement, its patience matching your own stillness. In the quiet, you think about how small each act of survival really is in the measure of history, yet how enormous it feels in the heart that lives it. You think of the road still ahead, the duties still waiting, and how, for now, they can all wait just a little longer. The cold touches your face, but it's a gentle touch now, no longer a threat, only a reminder that the world is vast and alive. You turn back toward the door, toward warmth, toward rest,